It's quite extraordinary when you think about the fact that every day and for all of our life, we are being exposed to sounds, we are making sounds, we are receiving sounds. Sound is bombarding us on every different level. It's affecting our heart, our nervous system, our breath, our respiration, everything. And yet we are so unaware of the power of sound. And it is such a blessing to be able to assist people in understanding the extraordinary energy inherent in sound. Sound is incredible. It's awesome. When you become introduced to the power of sound, it changes your entire life. As we begin to understand how sound can be used to heal us, to transform us, to change our consciousness, our senses open up, and indeed the very way that we perceive reality shifts and changes. Much of my work focuses upon what could be called healing sounds. That is, the use of sounds, most frequently the human voice, to restore balance to our physical body and our energy system. However, I think it's really important for us to understand that we can also use sound as a tool, much like acupressure, acupuncture, or any of the preventative medicines that can be utilized to keep us in a state of health and wellness, so that one does not have to be ill in order to practice and work with healing sounds. In fact, perhaps the best thing that we can do is to work with sound as a therapeutic and healing modality when we are in a state of health, so that we can maintain balance and harmony. We've been told since very, very young and early age that we couldn't sing. Perhaps when we went out for choir and the teacher told us, you, mouth the words, you, go out for track, you, sing softly. And yet each and every one of us can learn to use our voice as an instrument for healing, as an instrument for self-transformation. It's an extraordinary gift and a power that each and every one of us has. I would like right now to take this opportunity to present to you some basic principles of how sound can be used as a therapeutic and transformative modality. Some of the basic principles of using sound for healing. The first principle is the concept of resonance. Resonance, very, very simply stated, is the natural, normal, healthy vibrational rate of an object. Sound travels as a wave. How fast or slow and how many waves per second occur is called the frequency of a sound. Very, very slow moving waves create very, very deep sounds. Very, very fast moving waves create very, very high sounds. Now we hear from around 16 of these waves, very slow and deep, to around 16,000. Children, in fact, can probably hear upwards of 18 to 20,000 cycles a second. But as we get older, this hearing begins to diminish a bit. On a piano, the lowest note is around 20-25 cycles per second. The highest note is around 4,000. So the deepest note on a piano is around 20-25, and the highest is around 4,000. Another example of the difference in frequencies. Now, I'm going to ask you for today, and perhaps for the rest of your lives, to begin to perceive of sound as that which is much greater than what falls within our auditory bandwidth. In fact, begin to perceive of sound as the ancient mystics would perceive of sound, telling us from the East that Nada Brahman, the world is sound. And in fact, our cetacean friends, the dolphins, can project and receive information upwards of 180,000 cycles a second, which is 10 times greater than our level of hearing, and many, many more times greater in terms of our level of sound projection. To us, it isn't sound, but to a dolphin, it is. And indeed, that aspect of even the dolphin's ability is a small bandwidth in terms of the world of vibration. The ancient mystics and our modern scientists are in agreement. Everything is in a state of vibration. From electrons moving around the nucleus of an atom to stars in distant galaxies having planets moving around them. They're all moving, and they are therefore all creating vibration. Everything is in a state of vibration, and if it is in a state of vibration, it is ultimately putting out a sound. Perhaps not a sound that we can hear, but a sound nevertheless. Everything is in a state of vibration. From the chairs you might be sitting in, to the floor that your feet might be touching, to these TV sets or whatever you're using to watch this video. Everything is in a state of vibration and putting out a sound. And this includes our bodies. Every organ, every bone, every tissue, every system, every part of the body is in a state of vibration, and therefore it is putting out a sound. Now, as I said before, resonance is the normal, healthy vibration of an object, and everything has a resonant frequency. This, of course, does include our body. And when we are indeed in a state of healthy resonance, we call it sound health. The human body is like this extraordinary orchestra, with every part playing together like some wondrous symphony that is playing the suite of the self. But what happens if the second violin player loses their sheet music? Soon, not only is that violin player playing out of key, out of harmony, out of rhythm, they're playing the wrong notes, but soon the entire string section is sounding off. And sooner than you would realize, the entire orchestra is sounding off. This one out-of-tune player is creating chaos within the entire orchestra. This is analogous to the state of dis-ease, of something vibrating out of ease, out of harmony within the body and with the rest of the body. It's vibrating out of tune, out of harmony. It is vibrating out of ease. It is what we call diseased. I come from a family of doctors, and I have the greatest respect for allopathic medicine. My grandfather, father, and brother, all medical doctors. And yet, traditional allopathic medicine at this point in our scientific evolution has the approach of either giving this string player who has lost their sheet music enough drugs so they simply pass out and are no longer playing, or else cutting their head off with a broadsword, which is analogous to doing surgery. And once again, this also does remove the string player. But it also removes the string player and their harmonies and their wonderful sounds from the entire orchestra. What if it would be possible to somehow give this string player back their sheet music? What if we could somehow project the correct resonant frequency to that part of the body that was vibrating out of ease, out of harmony, cause it to vibrate back into harmony, and restore it to a state of health? That, very simply put, is the basis of using sound as a healing modality. We all have within ourselves the most extraordinary instrument for healing. we have within ourselves an instrument that doesn't require electricity, doesn't require batteries. The user's manual is really easy, and it doesn't cost any money to purchase. It's free, it's given by God, and it is, of course, our voice. We all have within ourselves the ability of using our voice as an instrument to restore health and body to different aspects of our physical body, as well as our emotional, mental, and spiritual bodies. So we are talking here about the use of the voice as a healing instrument. We're talking about entrainment, not entertainment. Entrainment is a phenomena of vibration that was discovered several hundred years ago by a Dutch physicist who had a room full of grandfather clock type pendulums. One day, for whatever reason, he began to move all these grandfather clock pendulums in different motion, and then he walked out of the room. And the next day he came back, and all of the pendulums of the grandfather clocks were locked in rhythm together with the energy, if you like, of the largest, most powerful of these pendulums. Entrainment seems to be a phenomena of physics and energy that has to do with the conservation of energy. Entrainment occurs throughout the world. Most frequently, it occurs within the realm of sound as a rhythmatic function, i.e. pulsations or rhythms. I would like to say to you that rhythms are, of course, an aspect of frequency. We were talking about frequencies being the number of cycles per second that a sound takes, and usually when we deal with rhythms, we are dealing either with very, very slow cycles a second, so that something, for example, like this is that's basically very close to 1 cycle a second. And if I were to slow it down even more, then we get a half a cycle a second, to the degree that you can work with rhythms not only as cycles per second, but as beats per minute. It is still frequency. Entrainment happens frequently within ourselves. For example, if we do indeed take a nice deep breath of air and release it with a sigh, by slowing down our respiration, we begin to slow down our heartbeat and our brain waves. Conversely, if we slow down our brain waves, we can slow down our heartbeat and respiration. This is one of the principles of biofeedback. Entrainment happens all the time. It's almost like a dance between people. Sometimes it's a dance that involves physical movement, but most of the time it's a dance that involves our different systems of the body, the pulsations of our nervous system and our hormones and other things like that, to such a degree that many women who room together will find that their menstrual cycles, the menstrual pulsations, if you like, will lock in synchrony and they will menstruate together. You find entrainment occurring within the heartbeat, the respiration, and brain waves of a college professor in a classroom, a minister and a congregation, a therapist and a client. The heartbeats of the people will begin to basically balance and entrain and synchronize with each other, and the brain waves and the respiration. It's not going to be a one-to-one correlation, but there is going to be a relationship. There is going to be a synchronization. Our brains pulsate and vibrate, and these pulsations, these vibrations, are measured, just like sound, in cycles per second. Now, I'm not talking about the actual molecular structure of the brain. This is something else. I'm not talking about the resonant frequency of the brain. I'm talking about the pulsations, the rhythmatic functions of the brain that determine, on one level or another, different states of activity and perhaps different states of consciousness. The brain pulses and vibrates. And these pulsations, these vibrations, have been broken down into 4 major delineations, which oftentimes relate to many different types of activities. The first main delineation of brainwave activity is called beta. And I'm going to try to demonstrate to a degree beta to you right now. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit faster, and I'm going to tell you that when you're in a beta state of consciousness, probably you're really going to be focusing on doing something right now, here and now. Perhaps it's banking, perhaps it's talking on the telephone, perhaps it's doing some sort of really interactive experience that really needs to get done now. You're working on something, you want to get it done. You're probably speaking a little bit faster, your brain's going faster, your heartbeat and respiration are going faster, and you're getting stuff done, and you're dealing with the physical plane right now. And this is really good, and this is really important, because beta is really good for here and now activity, particularly on the physical planet, and whether it's doing business or whether it's doing some sort of activity, you're getting it done. You can see the way. And I'm trying to entrain everybody here and there to the idea of what it feels like to be in beta for just a minute, because, okay, you know, we deal with beta a lot in life. In fact, we deal with beta so much that probably the world is a little bit out of balance in terms of being too beta-oriented. Because when you're in beta and you want to get stuff done right now and you can feel what I'm doing like this, you don't really think about what the repercussions for what you're doing are going to happen tomorrow or the next day or the next generation or the next generation after that. Some of the really extraordinary indigenous people on this planet will not do something until they consider the ramifications for at least 7 generations. And that probably, with those people, has kept them from causing a world out of balance, a world in chaos, a world that really needs great assistance. This concept of really focusing in on our next generation and our children's children is so important. And it usually doesn't come when you are in a beta state of consciousness, because you really don't think about those sort of things, and you can feel this. And now I'm going to, as I have been doing, drop down a little bit to the next brainwave delineation state, and this is called alpha. And I think I'll sit down for alpha. Now, alpha is around 7 or 8 cycles a second to around 12 or 13. Light meditation, creative visualization, daydreaming, these all occur with alpha, and alpha is a wonderful state to be in. I remember when the first days of biofeedback occurred, and I'd walk in on a friend who would be sitting in a lotus position with his eyes closed saying, "Don't bother me, man, I'm an alpha." And I would kind of walk out of the room going, "Oh, alpha." But since then we have found many, many other states of brainwave activity that are related to deep enhanced states of consciousness. There is a particular frequency which is called the Schumann resonance. It's approximately 7.8 cycles a second, although, like anything else, it pulsates. It goes up to about 8, 8.5, and goes then back down. And this Schumann resonance is said to be the resonant frequency of the ionosphere of the Earth. I first encountered information about this years ago from a wonderful book called Stalking the Wild Pendulum by a scientist by the name of Itzhak Bentov. Dr. Bentov believed that during states of meditation, as people moved into this very low 7.8 cycle a second alpha range, that one would entrain, their brain waves would entrain with the energy of not only the ionosphere of the Earth, but of actually the Gaia consciousness, so that one would be able to access greater realms of consciousness through entrainment at this particular frequency. Dr. Bentov suggested that when one was meditating and able to entrain with this 7.8 cycles second Schumann resonance, you would actually entrain with the energies of the Earth and what could be perceived of as the Gaia matrix. I would just like to suggest that I've been in this field for many years, and I've encountered many different people working with many different frequencies which they have felt were magic frequencies. There are indeed important frequencies that have been discovered There are indeed important frequencies that will be discovered, but there is another aspect besides the pure aspect of frequencies, which we will be discussing later, and it is the concept of intent. And indeed, I will tell you another very, very quick story. Some years ago, I was reading a book called Creative Visualization and Multidimensional Consciousness, written by a man called Lama Govinda, and it's a wonderful book about the Om Mani Padme Hum chant and many other sacred mantric forms. There was a small little footnote, a little asterisk in the book, and it said, there is no correlation between brainwave activity and states of consciousness. And I looked at that. There is no correlation between brainwave activity and states of consciousness. And all of a sudden I got it. And I said, yes, this is true, because you know, if there were a one-to-one relationship between the way the brain is oscillating and vibrating and our states of consciousness, we will all be at least semi-enlightened, because television puts you into an alpha state. Therefore, it is not only at what rate or oscillation the brain is working, but what you are doing with your consciousness while this is occurring. Very important. What is your intention during this frequency shift? More on this in a few minutes. Theta is a wonderful frequency for deep meditation, shamanic work, channeling, very, very powerful meditation, very, very powerful healing. And if I were to attempt to demonstrate via my speech and my field, theta, I would have to really slow down my talking and just tell you that it's really an extraordinary and peaceful place to be. Theta is wonderful, and I know that you will be able to resonate and entrain the theta brainwave activity very, very soon, if you're not doing it now. And now I'll bring us back up to a bit of alpha so I can continue talking to you about brainwave activity without any of us, well, shall we say, falling too deeply into a state of deep relaxation. The last brainwave delineation, brainwave state, if you like, that I would like to talk to you about is called delta. It's from about a half a cycle a second to around 4 cycles a second. Now, I've been in this field for a long time, and back in the mid-'80s, I was writing a scientific paper on the ability of sound to entrain and shift consciousness and affect brainwaves. And so I was therefore doing a fair amount of investigation into brainwave activity. And when I looked up delta, it was either defined as a state where people were comatose, in a coma, or in such a deep state of sleep that you'd have to pour water on them in order to wake them up. Delta was definitely not a coherent conscious state. Then, not very long ago, within this last decade, and actually probably somewhere in the mid-'90s, a good friend of mine, who was a medical doctor, was doing research, and he found that, number one, many shamans, many deep healers, many what they call trance channels, would display brainwave frequencies of 1 cycle a second, as well as the person that they were dealing with. If it was a healer and they had their hands, for example, on a patient or a client, the brainwave activity of the patient or client would also be 1 cycle a second. And they were conscious. They were not only conscious, they would be talking. They perhaps might be a bit blissed out. They would have their hands out and they would be talking about, yes, I feel the energy of the universe coming through my hands, and I know that I am in divine order with all that is. That sort of thing. It would be even slower and more relaxed than theta. But they were still conscious, which was really unheard of 10, 15 years ago. Now this deep state of delta, a lot of very, very powerful shamanic work, healing work, but I'd also like to suggest that there is a difference between our ability to what I call encoding greater frequencies of light and love into our physical body, into our etheric field, down to a cellular level, encoding higher frequencies of light and love and shifting our vibrational field that way, and making the assumption that our nervous system is to be raised up, because quite the contrary is true. In order to access higher levels of light and love, in order to access higher frequency levels and encode them into ourselves, it's necessary to slow down. In fact, my friend who had done these experiments with people found that they were oscillating, their brain waves were oscillating first at 1 cycle a second, and then there was a spike at a point called CZ over here. And this point registered 128 cycles a second, which fell within the audible range and had never been measured before. It is almost as though one were going very slowly on a diving board, hitting the diving board, and then springing up to a higher harmonic, a higher level of consciousness. So in order to speed up our vibrational rate, it's necessary first to slow down. Now, what does all of this have to do with sound? Except for the fact that sound and brainwave activity are both measured in cycles per second. Robert Monroe was a broadcast businessman. Robert Monroe, in his 50s, began to have spontaneous out-of-body experiences. Robert Monroe was quite a pragmatic businessman, a bit of a scientist himself, and he found that these out-of-body experiences were initiated, were triggered by a sound. So he began to assemble a group of scientists to begin to study brainwave activity to see if he could possibly trigger and initiate out-of-body experiences through sound. What he found instead was a very interesting and very important process. We're going to pretend that these are two tuning forks, or any sort of sound frequency, but we'll call them tuning forks. And we're going to say that this is a tuning fork of 100 cycles a second, and this is a tuning fork of 105 cycles a second. Now the difference between this 100 and 105 cycles a second is 5 cycles a second. It's the new math. 5 cycles a second. And if I were to take this tuning fork, hit it over here, bring it to my ear, and if I was to hit this tuning fork and bring it to over here, the predominant lobes of my brain, of the neocortex, would vibrate at 5 cycles a second. Not only that, the left and right hemispheres of the brain would synchronize together. Now this is extremely, extremely important, because it indicates the fact that sound can be used, number one, to entrain different brainwave activity, and number two, to synchronize the hemispheres of the brain, which has extraordinary implications. Robert Monroe called this phenomena the frequency following response, and he named this hemisync because of the synchronization of hemispheres. In the example that I just used of tuning fork of 100 and 105 cycles a second, there being a 5 cycle a second difference, I could have used any two different numbers. Let's say 350 and 358. That would have been 8 cycles a second difference. Or 423 and 433. That would have been 10 cycles a second difference. In other words, it is the difference between the two tones that cause the entrainment of the predominant lobes of the brain. And this is very important. And we find this phenomena being utilized very frequently in a lot of the different psychoacoustics. That is the use of sound to affect our psyche, if you like, the use of acoustics, psychoacoustic phenomenological events of today that are being utilized by many different scientists and musicians to create different brainwave activity and therefore, hopefully, different states of consciousness. Now, back when I was first researching this in the mid-1980s, I was doing this because I was writing a paper on a term that I created called sonic entrainment. Because I wanted doctors and scientists to understand that it was possible to change brainwave activity using sound. As I was writing this paper, very, very scholarly and very, very scientific, I was meditating one day and an inner voice said, "Pick up your tingshaws." My tingshaws, well, these are tingshaws, also known as Tibetan bells. And I actually had a whole lot of Tibetan bells because I would use them for meditational practices. They have some very, very powerful meditational uses in the Tibetan and Eastern traditions. I hit the Tibetan bells together and I listened. And I discovered that they were slightly out of tune by between 4 and 7 cycles a second. I had about a dozen of these at home. I picked them all up and I noticed the same phenomena occurring. It wasn't just by coincidence that these Tibetan bells were slightly out of tune by just the proper amount of frequencies within the theta state of consciousness. There was more to it than that. Incidentally, I told you that we hear from within 16 to 16,000 cycles a second. Well, if this is between 4 and 7 cycles a second, how can we hear it? The reality is that we cannot differentiate specific tones below 16 cycles a second, but we can perceive these low-frequency sounds as either a vibrato or a wah-wah-wah-wah-wah type of sound. So mind you, of course, the 2 Tibetan bells are probably somewhere in the 300 or 400 cycle a second frequency range. I don't really know what they are, but the difference between them, you can, when you hear it, you'll hear a wah 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 type of sound here. I'll do it, and let's give a listen. And if you were to time how many of these kind of wah wah type sounds occurred, you would find that there are between 4 and 7 of these specific bells. Let's give a listen. We'll do it again. Can you hear those vibrato type of sounds? The blah, 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 blah. It's not a pure tone that's going, ooh, it's going, ooh, 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 ooh. Once more. What's so interesting is that many of these so-called instruments or sonic sound-making devices of what many people consider to be primitive cultures are actually very, very sophisticated devices that utilize this entrainment phenomena to bring the people within the framework of the sound into a very altered state of consciousness. Not only Tibetan bowls and bells such as these, but many, many other shamanic instruments, including these devices called Peruvian whistling vessels that date back many hundreds, perhaps thousands of years, really giving an indication that many of the ancient civilizations had a much more sophisticated knowledge of how sound affects the psyche than we have ever considered. Many of my own personal recordings, of which we are going to be listening to some excerpts in a little while, but many of my own personal recordings utilize principles of sonic entrainment in order to help induce deep states of meditation, deep states of relaxation, deep and profound, powerful, initiatory and healing experiences for the listener. I'd like to quote for you from the New York Times, February 8th, 1988. Sound shaped into dazzling tool can make, break, or rearrange molecular structure and levitate objects. Sound shaped into dazzling tool can make, break, or rearrange molecular structure and levitate objects. This is from the New York Times Science section. We're talking about an energy form here that not only can enter our ears, our brain, affect our nervous system, heartbeat, and respiration, but can actually go into our physical body and create shift and change on a molecular level. And when you begin to perceive what that means, you realize that potentially any situation, any condition can potentially be altered, shifted, changed, alleviated through the use of sound. In my book, Healing Sounds, is a formula which I'd like to share with you, and it's this. Frequency plus intent equals healing. Frequency plus intent equals healing. Now, we know what frequency is. Frequency is the actual sound, but what is intent? Intent is the energy behind the sound. My friend Stephen Halpern one time said to me, sound is a carrier wave of consciousness. And indeed, he was correct. The energy behind the sound, the intention. Now, why is this important, and where did this come from? Nearly 20 years ago, I was working on a massive book, collecting many, many, many different systems of using sound as a healing modality. I had systems from doctors and scientists, spiritual teachers, gurus, all sorts of masters of sound. Different frequencies for healing one problem or another problem, different mantras for healing one problem or another problem. Pages and pages and pages of frequencies, pages and pages and pages of mantras, pages and pages of tones and sounds to heal. And none of them related to each other. None of them agreed with each other. They were all different. And I remember sitting at my computer with my head in my hands, trying to understand what was going on, because it didn't make sense. It didn't make sense. How could all these people be using different sounds and yet have success? One guru might have the Om sound resonating in the stomach area, the solar plexus area. Another guru would have the Om sound in the heart area. Another one would have it in the crown area, and they would all use these sounds to have resonance in that area and all have success. And that's just an example. It could have been one doctor using a specific frequency for one particular organ and another doctor using a very different set of frequencies for the same organ and having success. And I was so confused and despondent. And then, with my head in my hands, I heard a voice. It is not only the frequency, it is also the intent. And suddenly this extraordinary aha occurred to me, and I understood, and it made all the sense in the world that it wasn't just the frequency, but it was the intention of the person creating the frequency as well that made the effect of the sound. This is why you can have two people make the sound of Om and have two very, very different effects, or two people make the same sound for something else, and if their intention is different, they will create a different effect. Now, this is something I think a lot of us have experienced on a day-to-day basis from time to time, if we've ever been in situations when perhaps you've been at a party and somebody's walked up to you and they go, "Lovely to see you," and you feel like you've been psychically slimed. Because while the words, the frequency may have been "lovely to see you," the intentionality of the person making the sound was one perhaps of, what are you doing at this party and when are you leaving? That sort of thing. We've all experienced it because words certainly can be untrue. But the intentionality, we receive the intentionality perhaps on a more subtle level than many of us are aware of. We do receive this, and it's very, very important for us to be aware of this. Some years ago, they did an experiment. They took a group of people and they had them sit around a tape machine. Well, actually, the first thing they did was they took the tape machine and they put it next to the ocean, not in it, of course, next to the ocean, and they recorded the sound of the ocean. Then they had a group of people sit around the tape machine while it was still recording the sound of the ocean, and this group of people was silent. All they did was project positive, loving vibrations. Peace, light, love, however you want to think of it. They were doing positive visualization while the sound of the ocean was being recorded. Then they had the same group of people, they put in another tape, they turned it on, they had the people project anger, violence, any sort of nastiness that they could onto the tape. Then later on, using kinesiology, which is a method of muscle testing, many of you are familiar with this, where if something is positive for you and they'll test your arm like this, you'll be very, very strong. And if something is perhaps not good for you, your muscles will go weak. You can either use this muscle or many different muscles. Kinesiology, of course, is used by many different health practitioners, including chiropractors. Well, what they found with this particular series of tapes is that the sound of the ocean, the normal ocean, caused people to be strengthened. Their muscles would strengthen. Well, of course, one would presume that the sounds of nature were healing and strengthening. Then they had the sounds of the ocean while people were, for want of a better term, good vibing it. And people were rock solid. Oh, they were so strong. They were so strengthened by this. And then they put in the sound of the ocean while the people were bad vibing it. And people became weak. Their muscles became weak. It was the same sound, absolutely nothing different. And yet, there was a difference. People's, if you want to perceive of it as their electromagnetic field, their musculature, their nervous system became weakened by the intentionality, even though the sound was exactly the same. Just an example of how intention, how important intention is. Some years ago, I had a sound practitioner do an experiment with me. What they did was they played me a specific piece of classical music and asked me to check myself out. What was my breathing like? What was my heartbeat like? What did I feel? I did that. I listened and I realized I had been calm and relaxed. My breathing was deep and slow. Then they put on another piece of music. And they asked me to check myself out. With this other piece of music, I began to get nervous. My respiration, my breathing became very shallow, and my heartbeat speeded up. Now, the interesting thing about this was that it was the same piece of music, done by the exact same orchestra with one difference. The conductor. One conductor was very attuned to what we could call the Zen of music. So he conducted people in such a manner that they really felt the flow, the ebb and flow of life. And the other conductor was one of these people of, we must get it perfect and right. And that was a conductor whose energy made me go like this. I didn't have a clue. Once again, the intentionality being projected into the sound. Now, probably a lot of us have been sitting in a car, playing around with the radio, and we hear somebody who's making this incredibly perfect sound. Their voice is just elegant. We keep moving. Doesn't do anything for us. And then all of a sudden we stop and there's somebody with a really broken voice, singing a song about a rainy night and a train wreck and a dead cat or something, and we're in tears. We're in tears. Something moves us. What is going on? This first person had this extraordinary voice that was practiced and absolutely perfect. But they were probably putting all of their focus on creating a perfect sound. This other person may have had the ability of projecting emotional intentionality onto the sound, and we picked it up and perceived of it as listeners, the different effects. Now, Frank Sinatra was a wonderful singer, but I'm sure very few people would ever say that technically he was the world's best singer. He had a good voice. When Frank passed away, and different people talked about him, they would always say, Frank, when he sang a song, you knew he had lived it. Well, whether or not he actually had lived it, he had the ability of projecting the concept, the emotionality of the song. So whether or not it really had been a very good year when he was 17 or whatnot, you as the listener believed it because the intentionality was there. Intentionality is something we come across day to day when we speak. Intentionality is something that occurs all the time. You can watch different people on TV, on the news, or friends, and as you open up what could be perceived of as your third ear, that aspect of hearing that hears beyond the pure words, you can tell those who are telling the truth and those who aren't. And I would like to suggest to you that all of us who are involved in the process of this tape try to project the highest and most loving intention whenever we make sound, including the conversational voice. You know, when I do my different recordings, I'm very, very conscious about trying to be in a state where the energy that I'm creating, as well as the sound, but the energy is one that is going to be beneficial and positive and transformative and hopefully healing for people. I remember some years ago I was doing a recording that was an invocation honoring to Saraswati, the goddess of music and medicine. And I've been working on this tape for quite a long time. It was during the time, if you like, when it was a 30-minute chant, and the chant had to be done totally live. Nowadays, with some of the digital equipment, we can forego some of that stuff, but this was during the days when things had to be totally live. And I would sit in preparation and meditation and prayer to do this so that I could really be the embodiment of Saraswati and really put in incredible energy. And I remember for one of the takes, it was about 27 minutes into the recording, and all of a sudden, the studio door opened, and my son, who was about 3 years old at the time, called out, "Dad, are you there?" And I kind of laughed and went, "Yeah, I'm here." Turned off the machine, and I kind of laughed to myself. I shook a little bit because I was a bit upset at myself for not having closed the door or asked my son not to come in to see me. But also what happened was that I knew that until I got myself into a state where I would be able to then be once again attuned to the energies of Saraswati, I couldn't record. Because I didn't want that energy to be transmitted on to the recording. So I had to wait a day. It was okay, but it was quite a good learning experience for me in terms of the fact that if I had then continued on, I am quite sure that some aspect of the sound would have been perceived and received by the listener, and they would have picked up either my nervousness or my distraughtness or whatnot, and I didn't want that to happen. So for those of you who are musicians, for those of you who are speakers, for those of you who use language and talking in daily life, i.e. for all of us, let us be conscious about the power of intent. Let us be conscious about the use of sound. It's so important. It's so important. Our ears may be perhaps deceived by the words, but our bodies don't lie, and they know the truth of the intention behind the sound. I'd like to talk to you about another means of measuring sound. We talked about frequency, but there's another way. Actually, there are a few other ways, but one in particular is called the sound intensity. We think of this as the sound volume or the loudness. It's measured in something called decibels. Decibels are named after Alexander Graham Bell. And I'm probably talking to you now at somewhere around 50 to 60 decibels. If I were to raise my voice a whole lot, we'd probably get up to maybe 80 decibels. A rock and roll band could be somewhere around 100 decibels, and a jet plane taking off might be 120 decibels if you were standing right next to it. Now, they say that continued exposure, prolonged exposure to sounds above 100 decibels will cause hearing loss. I'm sure on one level this is true, but I must tell you that coming from the field of healing, I like to believe that there are many things that are possibly regenerative, including our hearing. Because I can tell you, I spent many years in rock and roll bands with my head very, very close to very loud amplifiers, and yet my hearing is incredibly acute right now. So perhaps if there was a degeneration of my hearing, I was able to once again restore it. Just something to think about. Because I didn't want to tell you about decibel level to talk about hearing loss. It's an important subject. I wanted to talk about something, though, that I think is equally important and less known, and that is this. Loud sounds cause us to experience the fight or flight phenomena. That is an increase in heartbeat, respiration, brain waves, the release of adrenaline, the disruption of hormonal output, and the disruption of immunological functions. The disruption of immunological functions. Think about this. It may be that many imbalances that we are receiving as a population on this planet are due to what could be called noise pollution. Many years ago, they did a study in which they took two demographically similar populations. In other words, the populations were basically the same types of people. One was in a pastoral setting, one was near a very loud sound source, such as an airport or something like that. The people who were near the loud sound source living there had a 65% higher incidence of stress-related illness, stroke, heart disease, cancer. This is important. Now, this may stem from the fact that when we were cave people and we heard a loud sound, if we were sleeping under a tree and we heard a loud sound, we would be up in the tree before we realized it was a saber-toothed tiger that was snapping at our heels. It was, in other words, a survival device. But nowadays, that aspect of the brain, the very old aspect of the brain back here, that processes sound, and particularly loud sounds, processes it the same way, whether or not it's a fire engine, a gunshot, thunder, loud music, somebody yelling. Still processed the same way. It still triggers the fight or flight response. I think this is very important for us to be aware of. Now, there are a number of ways of working with these sounds. Later on in another one of these tapes, we'll be dealing with some exercises that you can use to use your voice. But I would just also like to suggest that you can do something called noise masking, which is simply to put on another type of sound that may be of a lower volume, but at least will help, if you like, ease the energy of the sound. And sometimes also just humming and just doing another type of sound besides one that is really affecting you can actually affect the use of loud sounds. And this also includes those personal Walkman that you may be using, or personal stereo systems. Those can put out 100 or more decibels. And it doesn't matter if you're listening to rock and roll or if you're listening to smooth jazz or loud classical music. If it's loud music, it's going to have this response. Incidentally, I would like to tell you that it is my belief that we are all unique vibratory beings, and that what will work for one person will not necessarily work for another person. This includes sounds. We basically know this in life. Whenever I do a workshop, I ask how many people are allergic to penicillin, and there's somewhere between 10 and 20% of the audience will raise their hands. Now, penicillin is an extraordinary tool for 80% of the people, but for 20%, it's toxic. And the same thing is going to be found with sounds. So that for most people, one particular type of sound will be incredibly soothing and therapeutic and whatnot, but for another 20%, it won't work. So we really need to honor our uniqueness in terms of our response to sound. If something works for you, then honor it and start beginning to check out what it is doing to you. I think in the not too distant future, we will be actually having, if you like, sonic prescriptions for different types of sounds. As we entrain to different sounds, we will, for example, realize that if we want to really enjoy a meal, that we will play, for the most part, slow, soothing music. If you play fast music, you will begin to chew and masticate and digest to that speed of music. So we will begin to realize that different activities can be enhanced by different types of music. If you want to calm down and relax, most people will find that slow, gentle music will relax. For other people, you'll also find that they need, at first, through something called the ISO principle, they need to have very, very fast music to first hook them in, and then they need to be able to change it. But I'd like to suggest, for the most part, if you're trying to sleep and you put on really fast music, it's going to be counterproductive to that system. And at the same time, if you're trying to do exercise or aerobics and you're putting on slow music, your body and your nervous system, for the most part, will begin to try to entrain with that, and it will actually not enhance the aerobic activity. When I was living high up in the mountains outside of Boulder, and I was trying to get home from a party at perhaps 3 o'clock in the morning, I will tell you that what I would do is I would put on fast-paced, loud rock and roll, because I, at that time, wanted to create alertness. I wanted to create, if you like, the increase in heartbeat respiration. I wanted my adrenaline to be flowing because I wanted to be awake. If I put on some of the music that I normally create for relaxation, it wouldn't be therapeutic because it might induce sleep. And inducing sleep when you're trying to drive is not therapeutic. So I'd like to suggest that any music, depending upon the time, the place, and the need of the individual, any music can be therapeutic. With me, driving up a mountain at 3 o'clock in the morning, fast, loud rock and roll was therapeutic. But once I got home, I wouldn't want to listen to the loud, fast rock and roll. I'd put on something to calm down. So we are going to, as we continue with this awareness of music to affect not only our nervous system and brain wave, but all heartbeat respiration, but also to be able to go, and we will find that different music and different sounds can affect our hormones. It can actually affect our cellular structure. It can affect our chakras. It can go down to our DNA and actually influence and affect our DNA to help induce wellness within ourselves. And different types of music work for different people. And yet we will also say that you need to become aware of how music is affecting you, and then try to use this music as a constructive vehicle for your own activities, for your own daily awareness. Through doing this, you'll be able to lead more vital, energetic, and well-balanced lives.
Now it's time to look at some very interesting photographs that show how sound truly has the ability to affect physical matter. This first set of photos are the work of Swiss medical doctor Hans Jenny. They show the effects of sound upon materials, such as plastics, paste, dust, and water. These are the cymatics experiments conducted by Dr. Jenny in the 1970s. Cymatics is the Greek name for waveform. They demonstrate the effects of the waveforms created by different sounds to affect the actual shape of physical matter. The sound organizes the shape of the substance. Dr. Jenny did these experiments using a steel plate that was attached to a crystal oscillator through which he projected different frequencies. This first photograph is Dr. Hans Jenny doing his experiments. Here is the apparatus that he used. Dust or whatever medium that he was using was put on the steel plate. The photos you will be seeing were taken by a camera that was above the plate, shooting downward. This next photo is a plate of water being exposed to one sound frequency. Notice the extraordinary harmony and geometry being created by the sound. This next photo is the same plate of water with a different frequency. A particular sound will organize one form with a particular substance. Then the sound shifts and the cymatic patterns goes into disorganization and then reforms into another pattern based upon the new sound. This photograph is of the same water with yet one more frequency. Please keep in mind that many of the images are in reality constantly moving with the sound and are pulsing and vibrating. This photograph is of the same water with yet one more frequency. And for those of you into sacred geometry, please be aware of the different geometric forms that are created through the different sounds. Here is another frequency being projected into the water and another shape being created. In particular, please notice the diamond shape that is being created in this one. This next photo is actually a stained glass window that was created by man. And this is water with another frequency creating a form that looks very, very much like the previous slide. This is a photograph of milk being vibrated by sound. Remember that quote from the New York Times about sound having the ability to make, break, or rearrange molecular structure and levitate objects? Well, here is milk showing the first signs of overcoming gravitational fields. Here we see liquid plastic that is being vibrated by sound. It's creating a shape that looks very, very much like an underwater creature or perhaps even an angel food cake. Here we have a photo of a cell undergoing division. And now here is a sound formation, liquid plastic taking on a very similar shape. Here now the cell undergoes further mitosis or division. And here is liquid plastic exposed to a different sound taking on a very similar shape. It has been speculated that if you knew the correct resonant frequency of an object, you could create its shape. This is a photograph of the taste buds of the tongue. And here we have a photo of lycopodium dust, which is the spore of the club moss looking very, very much like the previous photo of the taste buds. Here we have the iris of the eye. And now in this next photo, these are iron filings being subjected to sound and magnetic fields taking on a very similar shape. This next photo is the yin-yang Tao symbol. And now here we have a photo of the lycopodium dust taking on a very similar shape as the yin-yang Tao sign. This is a photo of the spiral nebula, the Crab Nebula. And this next photo is said to have been the result of scientists at the Jodhpur Bank Radio Laboratory in England who took the frequencies that had been received by the spiral nebula and fed them into a black box filled with nothing but dust. The dust took on the shape, the same shape as the spiral nebula. This is the Bindu, an energy center within the brain from the Hindu tradition. And this photo is a cymatic pattern looking very, very similar to that of the Bindu. In this photo, we see that sound has caused the sand to take on a shape that looks very, very much like an ancient prehistoric trilobite. Sound can be used as a Jacob's ladder to journey to different levels of consciousness, or heavens as they may be called. This photo is of the Sri Yantra, the great mandala. It was the image that the ancient rishis and wise men in the Far East came upon when they meditated upon what the Om looked like, what the shape of the Om looked like. This is the image that they basically believed the Om created. It is found in tens of thousands of temples in India and the Far East. This next photo is from an experiment performed with an instrument called a tonoscope, which, much like the cymatic instrument of Dr. Jenny, was done with sand scattered over a steel plate, but instead of a frequency being put into the plate, you have a human voice going Om. And it creates virtually the same shape as the Sri Yantra, the great mandala. What the ancient rishis visualized the Om look like, indeed, it has been created in a laboratory, and it does look like this way. As you may know, much of my research, work, and training involves the use of the human voice to create change in ourselves. In particular, I focus upon vowel sounds and the power of their corresponding vocal harmonics to effect this change. These vocal harmonics have been utilized by Tibetan monks and Mongolian shamans for quite some time. I've now introduced a simplified method of making these vocal harmonics for Westerners, easy to create and receive the therapeutic benefits. The next 4 photographs are heat thermography photographs of me creating vocal harmonics. They were taken by Dr. Elizabeth Phillips, who was conducting tests on the effects of music to induce relaxation. Heat thermography measures changes in skin temperature. When a subject is relaxed, their skin temperature is raised. There seems to be a major relationship between changes in skin temperature and the organ behind or below the skin. Dr. Phillips took some photographs of me creating vocal harmonics. She did not develop these heat thermography photographs until months later. Then she excitedly called me, explaining that she had never seen such rapid changes in skin temperature. She consulted a neurologist with the heat thermography photographs. He was somewhat baffled by the rapid changes in skin temperature and wanted to know if I had been doing any visualizations while making these sounds. I said that no, I hadn't, but I had been consciously projecting the harmonics to specific portions of my brain. Dr. Phillips asked if I thought there was a possible treatment for headaches using this technique. I replied that I thought that this would be just the tip of the iceberg. This first slide here of the heat thermography photograph shows me before I began to make sounds. This next photograph was taken as I first began to create vocal harmonics. Notice the almost immediate changes in the color, especially around the forehead. The next photograph was taken as I continued making vocal harmonics. Notice again the continued changes in the color of the area around the forehead. This last photograph was taken at the conclusion of my creating vocal harmonics. Here you'll see not only continued changes in the color of the area around the forehead, but also in the sinus cavity and around the cheek area. The entire process of making sound probably took about a minute. These heat thermography photographs were taken during that time. Let's look at all these photographs together again in succession just to watch the progression of colors. They certainly indicate some powerful changes occurring through self-created sounds. I believe there is extraordinary healing possibilities with the use of vocal harmonics as a means of stimulating different portions of the brain and body. The next 3 slides were taken of what is now being called the earthquake rose. On February 28, 2001, an earthquake of 6.8 magnitude located some 30 miles beneath the earth struck Seattle, Washington. A sand tracing pendulum located at a shop called Mind Over Matter in Port Townsend, Washington, produce some very interesting patterns. These photos of the sand tracings were taken by Norman MacLeod. With regard to these photos, the first slide shows the actual sand tracing pendulum itself. This second slide shows a completed picture of the sand. Please note that the elliptical curves you see on the outside are what normally occur when someone sets the pendulum in motion to make a tracing without seismic assistance. Someone started the pendulum just before the quake. In this last photo, what is being called the earthquake rose is really evident. The pattern indeed looks very, very much like a flower, the lotus of a chakra, almost as though the earthquake was unleashing the energy of a chakra, or perhaps creating a chakra or energy center for itself. Earthquakes create frequencies that are incredibly slow-moving, very, very low and very, very deep. Through the aid of the sand pendulum, we can see that the earthquake rose photos are cymatic images which are extremely harmonious looking. This next series of photographs are the work of Japanese researcher Mr. Masaru Emoto from his book, The Message from Water. Mr. Emoto's work provides factual evidence that human vibrational energy, thoughts, words, ideas, and music affect the molecular structure of water. Please remember that water comprises over 70% of a mature human body and covers the same amount on our planet. Water is the very source of all life. This photo shows the beautifully formed geometric design of the Yushi Spring water. This next photo is from the Shimanto River, the last clean spring in Japan. Notice the extraordinary geometric forms. The fact that the molecular structure of water can be affected by our consciousness, our intent, and our sounds is extremely important. This photo is from the Mount Cook Glacier in New Zealand. Mr. Emoto has been visually documenting these molecular changes in water by means of his photographic techniques. He freezes droplets of water, then examines them under a dark field microscope that has photographic capabilities. His work clearly demonstrates the diversity of the molecular structure of water and the effects of the environment upon the structure of the water. This photo is from the fountain in Lourdes, France. This photo is from contaminated water from the Yodo River in Japan. In this photo, we can compare the contaminated water with clean stream water. Look at the difference. Mr. Emoto decided to see what effects music would have upon the structure of water. He placed distilled water between two speakers for several hours while playing different music and then photographing the crystals that formed after the water was frozen. This photo is of water being exposed to Beethoven's Pastorale. This photo is the effect of Bach's Air for the G string on the water. This photo is water exposed to Chopin's Farewell Song. This next photo is water being exposed and affected to music that was designed for healing. This photo is of water being exposed to the Kawachi folk dance. This photo shows the effect of heavy metal music upon the water. Here now we can compare the effects of healing versus heavy metal music and what happens to the water molecules. Mr. Emoto decided to see how thoughts and words affected the formation of untreated distilled water crystals by typing words onto paper and then taping this paper onto glass bottles overnight. This photo shows the effects of the words, "Thank you." This next photo shows the effects of the words love and appreciation. This photo shows the effects of the words, "You make me sick, I will kill you." And here we can compare the effects of thank you with the "you make me sick, I will kill you." Very, very different geometric forms being incurred through the intention. Now this photo is of a very polluted and toxic water from the Fujiwara Dam. Here now is the same water from the Fujiwara Dam after a Buddhist monk had offered a prayer over it. Prayer, that sound coupled with intention, seems to have an extraordinary ability of restoring water to its natural, harmonious, geometric symmetry. And in this photo we can compare the toxic water and then the effects of praying over the water. It's really quite impressive. These photographs that we have just seen show proof that not only does sound have the ability of affecting and changing physical structure, but that with regard to the molecular structure of water, that our intent with our sound is extremely important. This may have great implications for the future of both personal and planetary harmony and healing.
I'd like now, with your permission, to project a sound full of intentionality for you to perceive this. The sound that I will be creating, I basically will be scanning this room and creating, if you like, a tone that matches the resonant frequency of the, if you like, group oversoul of the people here. And the intention of this sound will be to add more luminosity, more light into your energy field. As I do this, I ask you to perhaps just close your eyes and receive the sound. And people at home may also receive the sound that is being projected, receive the intentionality of more light, more healing, and enjoy it. You may hear another sound within the sound. It may sound like an angel voice or a flute, and that is called an overtone. And the use of overtones for healing and transformation will be covered more fully in another recording. And there we have an example of sound projected with intentionality. I hope that you were able to receive the luminosity and love that was projected on that sound. We're going to do a slightly altered version of the Om sound. This we're going to do as the Aum sound. It's spelled A-U-M as opposed to O-M. And with this one we're going to do a slightly different pronunciation of it as a sound. Some perceive of this Aum to be the, if you like, tantric version of the Om. We're going to do it as a 3-syllabled sound. And there is all sorts of different attributes that can be given with this 3-syllabled sound, including many, many mystical, metaphysical, if you like, aspects of it. But for right now, I would like you to simply focus your attention so that when we make the Aum sound, we're going to do it as a 3-syllabled sound, A-U-M, or Aum. Can we all just say Aum? Aum. And we're going to do it with the intention that the A resonates in the heart center, the U or the U resonates in the throat center, and the resonates in the third eye and crown. So it's Aum, Aum.
Let's do this 7 times, okay?
We can do it with our eyes closed, focusing our intention and our attention upon the resonance of these sounds.
And one more.
Right now, we're going to do an exercise, a meditation, if you like, that will show us how different sounds can affect different parts of our body. So right now, I'd like you all to just make the very deepest ooh sound that you can, and see if you can project it and feel it right around this area. So join me, and we'll do it 3 times as we go. Many of us think that sounds really only affect our throat area and that it really comes out from the throat, and they can't feel the sounds resonating in different parts of their body. But with this exercise, I'm going to ask you to focus your intentionality and try to really feel the subtlety of the sound as we work with a couple of different specific vowel sounds in terms of projecting them to different parts of our body. Now we're going to make a mid-range ah sound and project our intention so that it vibrates right around the heart area, the upper chest, okay? We'll do 3 of those. A mid-range.
Again, we'll do it 3 times.
Finally now, let's feel our heads vibrate by making the very highest pitched E sound that we can make. Sometimes nasalizing the sound helps actually bring the sound even more into the cranial area. Ready? The highest pitched E sound.
One more.
And perhaps those of you in this room, as well as those of you viewers either at home or wherever watching this video, may have felt those 3 sounds vibrate in 3 very different areas. The very deep O sound vibrating in the belly and the lower trunk area. The higher pitched mid-range ah sound vibrating in the heart and the upper trunk area, and that E sound vibrating in the head. In another one of these videos, we're going to be working with the use of these sacred vowel sounds to resonate the chakras. But for this moment, we just wanted to give you the experience of working with a select few of the vowel sounds and seeing how you can experience the fact that sound vibrates and can vibrate different parts of your body, and therefore can not only vibrate different parts of your body, but work to resonate and balance those parts of the body, and can actually move energy to receive balance and harmony. I'm now going to demonstrate the use of Tibetan singing bowls. Tibetan singing bowls are called singing bowls simply because when they're struck, or when you use the stick to go along the side, they produce a singing type of tone. Quite lovely and very powerful. These are sacred instruments. When they're created, it is said that the makers of them sing and encode specific sacred mantras into them, so that when you utilize these Tibetan singing bowls in healing work, you are not only projecting the frequency, the sound of the singing bowl itself, but also the mantras that are encoded in it. Now, one easy way of using these is to strike them and bring them around the body, the auric field, such as this. Now, another way of working with these bowls is to simply put them on a part of the body that you feel would really perhaps have healing from the resonance of the bowl. So we'll do that like this. Slice the bowl. Now going to be listening to some excerpts from different recordings that I've created, which utilize, among other things, different sonic entrainment principles, as well as very, very powerful intentionality for healing. The first recording is from Song of Saraswati, which is an invocation to Saraswati, the Hindu goddess of music and medicine, science and sound. The second recording is from Dolphin Dreams, a recording that I created for the birth of my son. It features the sounds of ocean, heartbeat, choral voices, and it was the first time that dolphin sounds were ever used on a major recording. Dolphin Dreams has since become one of the most popular recordings for both the birthing process as well as for inducing deep states of relaxation and meditation. This third recording is an excerpt from Hermetic Harmonics, which features overtone chanting and Tibetan bowls looped in such a fashion that they create very, very deep entrainment frequencies, allowing one to access higher levels of consciousness. This next recording is from Trans Tara, which is a recording that invokes and honors the energy of Tara, the Tibetan goddess of compassion. Here you'll hear a very, very deep Tibetan growl tone voice, along with tambura and monochord, creating a very powerful field for relaxation. This fifth recording is from Celestial Reiki. It features very, very powerful entrainment frequencies as well as very, very spacious ambient sounds that help relax the mind and entrain the body to slow, relaxing waves. This next recording from Chakra Chants, my award-winning #1 bestseller, winner of the Album of the Year, and Best Healing Meditation Album. This first excerpt is from the root chakra. Feel the energy of this chakra, which represents the energy of grounding and earth. This next recording is from the lost chord, and it represents the energy of the throat chakra, the fifth chakra. With the lost chord, I included masters of sound and chant from many different traditions, including the Hebrew, Tibetan, and Hindu traditions. So on this piece from the lost chord, you hear many different sacred sounds designed to create very powerful, sacred initiatory experiences.